This video examines the landmark 1917 Supreme Court case of Buchanan v. Worley through the lens of a mock trial. This case deals with property rights and racial zoning ordinances. Buchanan v. Worley originated in Louisville, Kentucky. It was a civil suit to enforce a real estate contract, challenging a racial zoning ordinance from 1915 to 1916. Buchanan, a white homeowner, sued William Worley, a black postal worker, who refused to complete the purchase because the ordinance made his occupancy illegal. In 1914, Louisville adopted a racial zoning ordinance. The NAACP used the Buchanan-Worley contract dispute as a test case to challenge the law's constitutionality, turning a real estate dispute into a civil rights strategy. Louisville's 1914 racial zoning ordinance barred black citizens from purchasing homes on blocks deemed predominantly white. Though short-lived, its effects shaped patterns of residential segregation, wealth, and political power that remain visible today. Louisville experienced rapid growth in the early 1900s, accompanied by an influx of black residents. City leaders viewed this demographic shift with alarm, framing the ordinance as necessary to protect property values and the social order. The ordinance defined a predominantly white block as having at least 75% white residents. It prohibited black people from acquiring property on these blocks. Violations were voided, and involved parties could be fined. The law used the city's authority to regulate public health, safety, and welfare. Supporters, like Councilman O'Neill, defended the measure as safeguarding the property rights of honest citizens and protecting home value. Mayor Bogan stated that the ordinance was meant to ensure orderly growth and prevent a haphazard mingling of cultures. The ordinance faced immediate resistance. Reverend Charles W. Porter denounced it as a stain on Louisville's conscience. An earlier legal challenge by the Richardsons led a circuit court judge to declare the ordinance unconstitutional under the state constitution. The lawsuit by Buchanan against Worley was a strategic constitutional challenge led by the NAACP. They sought to overturn Louisville's racial zoning ordinance, which was eventually deemed unconstitutional by the court. We now turn to the arguments and witnesses presented during the Buchanan v. Worley mock trial. The Supreme Court's decision in Buchanan v. Worley is a constitutional law cornerstone regarding property rights, the 14th Amendment, and racial segregation. The pre-Supreme Court record featured forceful legal arguments and factual testimony from pivotal witnesses. Buchanan's arguments focused on 5 main points. The ordinance infringed upon his property rights, violated the Equal Protection Clause, was unconstitutional by interfering with the right to contract, was unnecessary due to private restrictive covenants, and was an overreach of state authority. We next examine the arguments and witnesses presented on behalf of Mr. Worley. Worley's core arguments stated that the ordinance infringed on his civil rights and denied him the right to acquire property. He claimed it violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, asserting that racial zoning was not a proper use of police power. Buchanan argued that the ordinance violated the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause by infringing upon his property rights, directly interfering with a willing seller's ability to dispose of land to a willing buyer. Key witnesses for Worley included Worley himself, who testified about the difficulty finding suitable housing, and Charles W. Anderson, who claimed the ordinance was meant to maintain segregation. Real estate agent Robert E. Williams discussed the negative impact on the local market. Buchanan's counsel also argued that the ordinance undermined the 14th Amendment's Privileges and Immunities Clause. They asserted that denying a citizen the right to acquire and convey real estate based on race constituted a class-based deprivation. Buchanan contended that blocking the sale interfered with his property rights under the Due Process Clause. He argued the ordinance denied the liberty of contract and was subject to strict scrutiny because it burdened a fundamental right. Buchanan further argued that the ordinance exceeded the legitimate scope of police power. He countered the city's defense, claiming racial segregation is not a traditional police power objective and that the ordinance's sole motive was unlawful racial exclusion. Charles H. Buchanan testified that his sale to Worley was a purely business transaction. William Worley, the prospective buyer, detailed how the ordinance limited his housing options, stating, "If the city can tell me where I may live, it is telling me who I am." Buchanan's main arguments focused on protecting property rights and asserting that racial zoning violated the 14th Amendment. He claimed the law illegally interfered with private contracts and prevented him from selling his property.